the National Shooting Sports Foundation's Larry Keane on tariffs in the gun industry. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for your free weekly newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news reporting and analysis instead of opinion and bloviating, so to speak. This week, we are talking about the gun industry, the state of the industry, the impact of these tariffs, perhaps, how sales have been and where things may be headed on a policy front. And to do that, we have the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, Larry Keane, with us. Welcome back to the show, Larry. Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thanks for having me, and I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Absolutely. And for anyone who doesn't know, can you explain what the National Shooting Sports Foundation is exactly?
Sure. NSSF is the firearms industry's trade association. So we represent the firearms, ammunition, hunting, and shooting sports industry. Everything from the manufacturers, big and small, to distributors, to retailers, big and small, endemic media, and companies that make products for the hunting, shooting, and personal protection market. So very broad membership, over 10,000 all across the country. So as your audience may know, we own the SHOT Show. That's our deal. And so people ask all the time, what's the difference between NSSF and, say, NRA or other Second Amendment groups? And the elevator speeches, the dividing line is the checkout counter. We're the industry side, the business side of that transaction.
Right, absolutely. And SHOT Show is the trade show in Vegas every year. You get 8,000, tens of thousands of people attend that.
Like somewhere between about 55,000 people come to the show. It's massive undertaking, as you know.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And so let's talk about the big news of the week. We got sort of a bit of a back and forth on this, but tariffs are what everyone is talking about, obviously, and they are intended, according to President Donald Trump, to try and boost the American manufacturing sector. Obviously, the gun industry has a very strong American component for manufacturing. It dominates the market, really, but also strong import sector as well. Glock and SIG and all sorts of gun makers are from other countries. Now, they also, some of them make their guns here too, but let's just go through it a little bit. We had the first round was supposed to be, really much larger increase in tariffs on some of these other countries, especially the ones I think most relevant to at least the guns and ammo side, the EU and Brazil, Turkey, where you'll see some very popular imports come from. And then Trump walked that back a bit and went down to a 10% tariff on those, and then 145% on China, where, to be fair too, while there aren't a lot of guns or ammo necessarily coming from China, there's a lot of other gun accessories, really, red dots and clothes and slings and things of that nature. So what, I guess just start us off here with, how is NSSF looking at this? Are you concerned about the overall tariffs, even with this pause in place, or how are you feeling?
Well, it's just tough to keep up because it keeps changing every day. Some little bit of whiplash, but we are certainly monitoring the situation. We do have concerns about how it will impact the market. Tariffs on commodities like steel, aluminum, and copper will increase cost of manufacturing. And it'll cause the price of even domestically sourced commodities to increase as people transition from imported to domestic. Prices are going up no matter what. That'll increase the cost of manufacturing. Some part of that cost will be passed on to the consumer. Some the companies will have to absorb. And then, of course, on finished products, ammunition, firearms, etc., tariffs, will increase the cost, increase the price for those items. And then, China certainly is a source of a lot of accessories and things like that. There is a significant amount of shot shell is imported from China. So we're trying to gauge it. I think we understand the objective of the administration is to onshore jobs and to level the playing field. So the pause is welcome. We can catch our breath at least. But for NSSF, we've got members on both sides of the equation, right? I mean, by analogy, if we were, the National Car Industry Association, we have Audi, Volkswagen, BMW members, Toyota, and then we also have Ford, Chevy, and General Motors are members. So, they have differing points of view on the subject, and so it's difficult as a trade association to take a position, because whatever position you take will make some of your members unhappy. So we're looking at it. We're trying to provide information to the industry about the tariffs. It's hard for us at this point to gauge economic impact. What the prices will be, because we don't know how much will be absorbed and how much will be passed on, but it will certainly have an impact. So at this point, we're sort of like Switzerland. We're monitoring it. But we do certainly understand the objective is to onshore jobs. And as you mentioned, a number of even the large importers like Beretta, SIG, Glock, Tariffs also manufacture as well as import. So it's a sort of not difficult, but it's sensitive to make sure we don't, we take the right position. So at this point, it's monitoring, providing information, staying on top of it. We will be doing a webinar for our members in the near future about what your legal options are if you want to, seek exemptions, exceptions on the tariffs. I'm not quite positive of the nomenclature. It's not the kind of law I practice, but we want to make sure, for folks, they know what their options are. And even for NSSF, the tariffs will have an impact, because the locks that we purchase from vendors and distribute as part of Project Child Safe, for example, come from really either Taiwan or China. There's no U.S. lock manufacturers. Back to the point of the president's objectives, and those same vendors provide locks that go in the box that manufacturers provide. So, we're going to take a look at that and what our options are, because again, they largely come from China, and so that will significantly increase the cost of those locks, that we distribute and that the manufacturers put in, with new firearms that they ship. So, but the pause is welcome, so I can catch my breath.
Yeah.
Figure out
so there's a pause right now, right? This 90-day pause. Now, I guess even with the pause, you're still getting this at least 10% increase in tariffs across the board on every country. So costs presumably will go up for any sort of imported good, raw material or final product, though not as much as it was originally announced. I don't know, and is 90 days, in theory, these could all come back after 90 days, or frankly,
good, or like for example, that the situation with TikTok, the president has extended the deadline again.
Right,
so
it could get extended. Yeah,
they paused it because, according to the White House, 50 of the 60 countries or something like that have said they want to negotiate. So they paused it so they can have those negotiations over the next 90 days. I wouldn't be surprised to see at least some of the tariffs, the pause extended at least as to some countries if they're making good progress. And
sure.
So
I guess
it's a fluid situation.
Yeah. The question there is, is 90 days enough time to like reasonably shift, for instance, even just the locks that you're talking about, to shift suppliers or onshore that operation?
Well, certainly not to onshore, right? Somebody has to build a factory to make them, and that doesn't happen overnight. And that's one of the issues is, it takes, you've seen companies in other industries commit to, investing billions of dollars to build new facilities to manufacture in the United States, but that takes time, takes years to, get the permits to build the building, to hire and train the employees. So it's not going to happen overnight. But so that's part of it, but also just getting fair trade. We support free trade, fair trade. We want to see more imports. We want to see more exports, and let companies compete in the marketplace and who's got the best product. So we work on both. We work to improve the import situation and, importantly, to improve the export market. And the countervailing tariffs that have been imposed or threatened will constrict the export market. If the EU jacks up tariffs, that will be an issue.
Yeah, and right, because that's the other concern is the potential trade war effects of this. I mean, you're already seeing it a bit with China and the EU, as you mentioned, but it could get worse. Is one of the main concerns that, and then that might seriously harm American exporters too, right?
Absolutely, and we've already lost 36 countries under the Biden interim final rule. We want to see repealed by the Trump administration, and we're certainly actively working on that as we speak. But so I think I suspect we'll see progress on the negotiating front, and I think I wouldn't be surprised at all to see tariffs put back on and then taken back off if it's necessary to squeeze people. Look, it's all a negotiation at this point. And, I think over his lifetime in business, the president has demonstrated he knows how to negotiate. He wrote a book about it, The Art of the Deal.
Yeah. I think that was ghostwritten, but yes, I understand your point here that he's been in business a long time. The White House has been they've said a couple of different things about why they want these tariffs at different points, but I understand where you're coming from as far as this idea of it's perhaps a negotiation tactic. That is one of the things they've said. Now, just to give people like an understanding of this, because you just at a base level, right? I think it's pretty easy to grasp why tariffs are going to be hard for importers, right? It's because it's just a tax that goes on top of the cost of doing business, right? It's just a tax. Well, I think the harder aspect for people to understand maybe is why it could be negative for American producers, right? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but can you why might an American producer not want to see the large tariffs on imported goods?
Well, I think probably for American manufacturers, tariffs on imported commodities will raise the price, both obviously of the imported commodity, but it will also increase the price of that same commodity domestically sourced, because people will, the market will transition from higher prices to lower prices, right? As they move from imported to domestic. Well, that will increase demand for the domestic source of the commodity, and just basic economics, prices will go up. So cost of production is going to go up, and some amount of that, depending on the commodity, the margins, et cetera, will be absorbed by the manufacturer, hurting their profitability. And some of it will be passed on to the consumer, resulting in higher prices. So that's just, basic economics. It's just why a lot of people, don't support trade wars. They think that they never work. They raise prices. They cause inflation. All of those things. But domestically manufactured shotgun. Well, if you're bringing in lead shot from China, that's going to increase cost of manufacturing. It's going to result in an increase in the price of shot shell in the United States from domestic manufacturers. So
And
Yeah.
and obviously the counter argument to that is well, they should buy from they should produce it here. Is that realistic? I guess is one of the big critiques, like that they can't necessarily get all this stuff from.
Well, there are no lead smelters in the United States anymore, right? So, and lead that's used in ammunition is, it's basically all recycled lead, and there's, so the main source is from China at this point, and so there'll be opportunities for a business to be created to recycle lead in the United States. There is some, but and like any business, you want to improve your margins. You try to buy just like a person going to Walmart, right? You want to buy less expensive things so you can buy the commodity that's cheaper, and that improves the pricing, improves your margins, your profitability. You're going to do that. That's not our industry. That's every industry. And so obviously over the last 30 years, a lot of jobs have been offshore to places like China, increasingly Vietnam and elsewhere because of lower labor costs in those countries. And that's really, what's driving the president. And, if you really want to get a window into this thinking, I would commend that you read Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance before he was elected. It really kind of gives a window into, the loss of industrial jobs, manufacturing jobs, particularly in the heartland where he comes from, and the impact that's had on those communities. So, certainly creating more jobs, manufacturing jobs in the United States will be good for the U.S. There's certainly issues about that we learned in COVID where, we were relying upon other countries to provide PPE, medicines, and things like that. So I think it's one of the lessons of the COVID pandemic was not to be reliant upon foreign sources for critical things like medicine. And, we see this, for example, with nitrocellulose, which is a critical component of making gunpowder. There's only one U.S. domestic source for nitrocellulose. It's called explosive nitrocellulose, gun cotton. And that's the Army Radford facility in Radford, Virginia, which is government-owned, contractor-run. The rest of it was imported from places like China and Turkey and Brazil, but mostly China. Well, we no longer import nitrocellulose from China because China is sending it all elsewhere, primarily Russia. So, you don't want to be reliant upon a foreign source for critical items. But we'll just have to see how it kind of, plays out. I think we're going to see deals. These countries ran to the White House to say we want to negotiate. I think that was clearly part of the president's strategy, was to ratchet it up, gain leverage in the negotiations, and I think he clearly has. Look, the U.S. is, an enormous economic market, and these foreign countries need to be able to sell their goods into the United States. The trick is to, allow us to be able to sell our goods in their countries and at the same time create more manufacturing jobs in the United States. But that doesn't happen overnight. That takes time to, find a place, build it, all the permitting that goes with it, and takes years to put up and, cut the ribbon on a new factory. So it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, no, I take your point that there's certainly legitimate reasons why you might want to pursue policies that would increase manufacturing in the United States, especially in specific industries like you're talking about with the gunpowder components. I guess, obviously the main critique here, and you kind of articulated earlier, is just that these across the board tariffs, blanket tariffs, are, they're obviously not targeted. Oftentimes we saw this in the first Trump administration with washing machines. They did bring some manufacturing back to the United States, but the cost of that was something like $800,000 per job. And so it can have knock-on effects in other industries, I guess, is the critique. And, this is not an economics channel, right? So there's obviously a lot of, debate around whether these make sense in total. I guess I just want to zoom in on the gun industry, right? And so one of the questions I have is, beyond the fact that maybe this isn't going to be as good for domestic makers as it might seem, because yes, the cost of the imported competitors may go up, but also their cost of doing business goes up as well, so that everyone has to raise prices at that point. But some of these import tariffs, the initial numbers were to the point where, you start to wonder if some of these very popular brands could survive. I spoke with Lucky Gunner and SG Auto, another online ammo dealer, about, some of the thoughts they had on this. And both of them pointed to PMC, which is a very popular ammunition brand. It's made in South Korea. Initially, the tariff there was going to be 25%. Now, obviously, it's been paused and down to 10%, I guess, at this point. But, is there one of the concerns they raised, especially SG Ammo, just kind of basically said there's no way that these brands are going to be able to even continue to operate in the United States under that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the ammunition market, the imported ammunition is, if these tariffs that were put out there stay and hold, it's going to be very challenging for those importers to bring ammunition into the United States. So some of those companies are members, as are the U.S. manufacturers. So that's a good example of where it's, if we say the tariffs have to go, well, that's not going to make some of our big manufacturers happy. And if we say tariffs are great, we're going to, make our importer members unhappy. Right. So it's
well. Here's a question.
So Switzerland, but I take your point that, and I heard that this week in talking with a number of ammunition importers during our fly-in, that it's unsustainable at those prices. That's just unsustainable.
And let's say that happens, and some of these foreign makers have to drop out of the American market. Is there even enough manufacturing capacity right now in the United States to make up for that loss? I mean, my understanding is a lot of these ammo makers are running at pretty high rates as it is.
I'm not sure about that. I haven't really inquired about, is there additional capacity? Certainly the ammunition market's better than it was a few years ago, where supply was not enough to meet demand. So I think and again, building an ammunition factory is not an easy thing to do. It's very expensive, right. Particularly, it's a very, very high volume, low margin business, right? So, and
it's volatile, right?
Yeah,
that's the other half of it is, they're going to want to be. I remember reporting and talking to a lot of these domestic manufacturers during the COVID, shortage. And one of the issues is that they don't want to build out a factory if they're not sure that it's going to be running, and then they'd have to lay people off and their business goes on. They're concerned about that sort of thing.
That's a very legitimate concern, right? If you invest a lot of capital to build additional capacity and then demand goes away, how you can't get a return on your investment. So, or a reasonable return on your investment. So it's this is why the CEOs get paid the big bucks, right? They've got to make these decisions. But I don't think there's any question that high tariffs on imported ammunition from places like South Korea or Bosnia or elsewhere, Brazil, will impact those companies that import it, will impact the price of ammunition. But again, this is not unique to our industry, right? I mean, the price of an imported car is going to go up, right? Mm-hmm. The price of parts for your imported car to repair it are going to go up. So,
speaking of the car industry, because I do think that is a pretty good analog, right? It's another industry where you have a very strong American manufacturing component. Some of these brands like Stellantis have already throttled manufacturing plants or laid off people, even in the United States, in anticipation of these tariffs. Have you seen anything like that?
I've heard, I was talking to an importer this week at our fly-in, and that, the factory overseas is basically shut down. And a couple hundred people in that country that worked at that factory are on vacation, if not out of a job, if the tariffs hold. So, it has impacts on both sides of the transaction. So
you haven't heard of anything here in American companies at this point?
No. Well, I know of there is a foreign ammunition manufacturer who has been in the process of, and is about, as I understand it, about to make a big announcement of a massive investment to build a facility in the United States. Let's just say in the Midwest. And so
probably not the Northeast, right?
Yeah. Well, no, I don't see anybody opening factories in the Northeast.
Yeah.
So you're seeing it, and I think, and as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the big companies that have, foreign parents like Glock, Taurus, SIG, Beretta, they manufacture here in the United States as well as import. So I think you might see, if this goes on and is sustained, you might see them increase their manufacturing capabilities in the U.S. And to make in the U.S. what they used to import, which is frankly how some of these companies came to have manufacturing in the United States. They couldn't import certain products, so they started building factories here.
Okay, well, so let's talk a little bit now about I guess real quick, the 154% tariff on China. Anyone that's making products there, now again, they don't do guns and ammo. I don't think they import ammo, right? It's my understanding. Chinese ammo doesn't make it to the U.S.
Not assembled cartridges, but lead shot. But not firearms. You can't import firearms from China.
Right. There's already restrictions in that way on China and Russia,
long-standing,
some of these other countries. But red dots especially. I think that's where, I guess, if the average consumer expects to see this impact right away, it's probably going to be in the red dot market, right? Because that's become so popular.
I think optics will be impacted. A lot of optics are imported, or components are imported. So I think it will have an impact in the optics market.
That's probably where you'd immediately see it, right?
I think so. Yes, and soft goods, a lot of like hunting clothing and things like that are made in China, Vietnam, elsewhere in Southeast Asia.
Do we know if Vietnam is part of the pause? Because that was another big.
I believe it is. I believe they were one of the very first countries to say we want to talk. So.
Yeah, they offered to take off all their tariffs, but my understanding is, this, like you've said at the beginning, it's been moving very fast. I'm not entirely sure what the status is.
I think my understanding is that they were one of the very first countries to say, wait a second, we want to talk.
Sure.
So I believe that's going on. I think South Korea is sending, I read this morning that South Korea is sending a trade delegation to talk. Yeah, I know. I talked to another importer this week who, met with the president in the Oval Office, and and the president told him that, I think it was, of the 60 countries that were on the chart, 50 have already knocked on the door, and the EU has paused their reciprocal tariffs at the same time. So, and even within Europe, there's differing point of views about how to approach this, right? Between the Germans, the French, the Italians. The British aren't part of the EU anymore, but so you may not even see a unified front from the EU. I mean, countries may decide to negotiate their own deals. So
sure, yeah. So we'll have to keep an eye on how that all is going to turn out for sure. Speaking of the industry, though, and the sort of economic impact here, you guys just released a new report on the industry's overall economic impact, and you found that increased quite significantly since you first started
Yeah,
taking this.
we started putting out an economic impact report in 2008 that coincides with when we started our congressional fly-in. And so since 2008 through 23, which is a 379% increase in the total economic impact of the industry. So when we started, it was 19.1 billion in '08, and now through 2024 report, it's $91.7 billion. So that's a 379% increase.
And what is that? What does that capture?
Firearms, ammunition, hunting, shooting, manufacturing, and induced jobs. So manufacturing jobs and induced jobs as well. So
like suppliers.
Suppliers, exactly. So OEM, OME, and other, induced jobs. There are, economists have mathematical formulas they use to, to estimate induced jobs. We went from 90.5 billion in 23 to 91.7 billion in 24 in terms of in the industry's economic impact. We've seen an increase in jobs, increase in the wages that are paid. So, for example, we're now when we started, it was 166,000 jobs. Now it's up to 383,000 jobs, and that's a 130% increase. And average wages went from $67,500 last year to this report. They're now at $68,300 wages and benefits per job, which is that's a very good paying job, well paying for jobs in the industry. So, and then as you've seen, Pittman Robertson dollars have gone up significantly over the past many years.
And that goes to conservation.
Right.
Efforts.
So manufacturers pay a 10% 10% tax, different kind of tax, on ammunition and handguns rather, and 11% on long guns and ammunition. And so there's been a 238% increase in Pittman Robertson excise tax payments since we started the report. And we have years where we're over $1 billion in Pittman Robertson excise tax dollars, and that's the primary source of wildlife conservation funding in the United States. So, and just jobs, taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, local taxes, all obviously increase as the industry grows. So, and over time. You just look at the next numbers, and it shows growth, a growth trend over time. You have ups and downs. Certainly, things peaked quite significantly during COVID and the aftermath of the whole George Floyd and the BLM issues in the summer of 2020. But if you look even now, we're about at pre-pandemic levels. And if you told somebody, in 2009 where they would be in 2019, they'd be very happy. And so that's about where we are. As you said, the market's picked up a little bit in response to the tariffs. People are, trying to buy now before prices go up, which is a normal consumer reaction for any product.
Sure.
And then, we'll see what happens with the tariffs. But, we've been over 1 million plus in adjusted NIC checks for, closing in on 6 years in a row. So, right. The market's growing, the consumer base is diversifying, which is a good thing. And market goes up and down. Yeah,
sure.
It's just a normal cycle.
It sounds like from that report that the long-term trend for the industry is pretty good.
Yep.
Pretty strong growth. I imagine that's above, just the population growth, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
So you've done the industry has grown significantly since 2008. Obviously these numbers, the NICS numbers most recently, as you mentioned there, is showing a bit of a downturn from the peaks, certainly. But it's been, that those peaks were in 2020 and we're in 2025 now. We're seeing some of these latest, now it's just 1 month, 2 months, not necessarily a super long trend, but you have seen the last couple months below some of those pre-pandemic levels. It sounds like you're still fairly confident in where things are at, though.
Yeah, I mean, look, slow and steady wins the race. Obviously companies would like to see more sales than less, but I don't think you see any panic in the industry at all. I think it's a reflection of part of the market is driven by the politics of the issue, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no legislative threat coming out of Washington that would cause concern and motivate people to buy now before a ban goes into effect. So you do see surges in sales in states where there are restrictions being enacted or considered, which is, again, a normal reaction. And when the consumer perceives a legislative threat to their ability to buy certain firearms or ammunition, et cetera, they typically respond. We didn't see a surge in sales leading into the election like we did in 17.
Yeah, that was a bit odd.
16,
right?
17. And I think that just reflects that the consumer was confident that Trump would win and Harris would lose. As you got closer to the election, that became, I think, more and more apparent and likely. So, and people in the industry leading into the 16 election assumed there was an assumption by many that Hillary Clinton would win, and that would cause a surge, post-election surge in demand. And so people, position their inventory accordingly. That didn't happen this time. People did not, did not
So the
surge their inventory and then sitting there holding inventory. And
the industry's a bit better positioned this time around for a bit of a slowdown, maybe.
Yeah. So, and inventory is money burning a hole in your pocket, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that obviously that was what a lot of people contributed the first slowdown in during the first Trump term to, the politics of the issue. There wasn't concern over new restrictions necessarily, at least not as much. Excuse me. And so I think a lot of people are assuming that's going to happen this time around too. One thing I do start to wonder, though, is you had all these new gun owners come into the market in 2020. Do you get concerned seeing sales drop below those pre-pandemic numbers? Because shouldn't these millions of new gun owners be, keeping the market a bit higher than it is right now?
Well, we're seeing new buyers come into the market, more women, more ethnically diverse consumer base, and that's encouraging. So there was, 22 million people purchased firearms for the first time in 2020, and that's the population of Florida. And you see people that might purchase a firearm for self-protection and then don't go to the range, or then they have the one gun they want or need and they're not buying another one. So well, I
guess that's the question. Like, is the industry failing to turn those people into repeat buyers, like maybe a traditional gun?
Well, we spent a lot of time and effort to encourage people to go to the range. It's, if you have a firearm for self-protection, you really need to train on it. Just don't leave it sitting in your drawer, because when that emergency may arise, you're not going to be as capable using that firearm for self-protection as you would if you practice on a regular basis. So we do try to encourage people to do that. We do try to encourage new people that enter the market to participate in the shooting sports. We have any number of programs that NSSF runs, like Plus One, First Shots, and things like that, to try to help retailers and ranges encourage people to participate in the shooting sports, to go hunting, and then that typically leads to people buying additional firearms. it's a little bit like, skiing or golf, or, you buy your set of golf clubs, and then you play golf, and as you start playing, you realize, well, I need a different putter, I need a better wedge. And if you ski, which I do, if you get your first set of skis, well, then you realize I need a different kind of ski for skiing moguls and a different kind of ski for skiing deep powder. And, so you start buying more than just the one product. So, but look, as I said, if you told somebody in 2009 or 2010 where they would be in 2000 or 2025, they would be very, very happy, right? So, our job is to work to help the industry grow and engage people to participate and enter the shooting sports, hunting, and people, as the number one reason people purchase firearms today is for self-protection. So,
right. So you mentioned a little earlier, it's legislative side of this, the policy side of this. What are some realistic goals that you guys have in mind for this administration, either with legislation, which does seem to be like it's going to be probably a bit more challenging given the makeup of Congress, but also for ATF rulemaking, ATF policies. What are you focused on in that area?
Well, we have any number of legislative priorities, everything from addressing financial discrimination to hunting and shooting sports to conservation policy. Certainly, we want to see concealed carry reciprocity passed. We're glad to see that get out of the House Judiciary Committee. But the reality is that, while there are pro-gun majorities in the House and the Senate, the majorities are very thin. And, to move significant legislation in the Senate, you need 60 votes to overcome a filibuster. And so that's a challenge. But, we will continue to push our legislative priorities. And we just had our congressional fly-in this week, and we had dozens and dozens of industry members come, and we had, I think something like 100 meetings with members of Congress and the Senate and their staff. And so we're already seeing the results of that, and more members signing on as co-sponsors to our priority legislation. But I think
sorry, just real quick on that point. There's these big ticket items that we talk a lot about, like concealed carry reciprocity, that are going to be really hard lifts to get through the Senate. But in theory, presumably there are other, maybe not as significant reforms, but still worthwhile changes in NSSF's view. For instance, the end of the Biden administration, they passed the Explore Act, which included component for
range access,
gun ranges, on public land. So that passed after Biden had already lost, right, through the lame duck Congress. Is there something like that
sure.
you can think of?
I mean, we want to see. We're going to be working with BLM and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Forest Service to implement the Range Access Act, which is a component of the Explore Act, which would require each BLM unit and each national forest to have at least one shooting range. So we're working on implementing that. We're continuing to work to have more state fish and game agencies build and improve ranges through the Target Marksmanship Act that passed a couple of years ago. Where there's room for legislative progress, typically in the conservation space, because you can get bipartisan support for that. But a lot of the work is on the regulatory side, is policy, and so we're working very diligently on any number of regulatory matters, like repealing the export rule that Biden put in place that hurts the industry. We're looking at we're very glad to see Justice Department announced that they're going to look at the engaged in the business rule. We think that's a terrible rule. It's unconstitutional. clearly exceeds statutory authority and was designed to impose as close to universal background checks as possible.
Right. It
Very
requires
glad
more
to-
people to get a license before they can sell.
who are not engaged in the business. And the rule itself is pretty absurd. You don't even have to sell a gun. You just have to advertise it. And according to that rule, you're engaged in the business, which of course not what Congress said. So that, other ATF matters, we want to see suppressors moved off the commerce, moved from state to commerce. They shouldn't be on the USML, U.S. munitions list, regulated for export by the State Department. That's sort of the dangling participle of the export control reform we worked on so diligently and were able to get done in the Trump administration. We now need to, we would like to see that finished and any number of regulatory issues, both between commerce, state, and obviously ATF, NICS. We want to see the rule that died at the end of the Biden administration to implement the ability of licensees to screen current and prospective employees to see whether they're prohibited persons or not. There's no opposition to that, but that is stalled. The Biden administration, dragged their feet on that. They put out the rule at the very end, knowing that it would die at the end of the term, because the first thing every new administration does is when they come in is they put the brakes on all legislative matters so they can, or regulatory matters rather, so that they can, decide what they want to do with them. So we're trying to get that, kick-started and finished. So long list of to-do.
All right. Well, hey, look, I appreciate you joining us and giving us NSS view on all these different areas. I'll let you go and get back to your pup, who seems to want to see you.
It's not my dog; it's my wife's dog.
But yes, appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to have you back on in the future as well.
Always happy to do it. Thanks.
All right. I'm going to send it over to myself to tell people a little bit more about the dispatch now. All right, folks, it's time to talk a little bit about the dispatch, doing an ad swap here between the reload and the dispatch. And I think that's fitting because if you like what you're getting from the reload in terms of high quality reporting that focuses on hard news, you'll probably like the dispatch as well, because get this, they also focus on high quality reporting and hard news. Now, they are a much broader publication than the Reload. We obviously focus on one specific area, whereas the Dispatch has a much larger team and is able to focus on a whole number of other issues, but still primarily in that national politics realm like we do here at the Reload. But they are one of my favorite publications. I am a paying member to the Dispatch, and so clearly, I highly recommend it. I've been a paying member since they were founded, and I've never had reason to rethink that even once. So they are constantly breaking news stories. They are sending you newsletters on whatever frequency you want. They have quite a variety of them over there. But I subscribe, for instance, to the Morning Dispatch, and I get, I think, a very nice summary of what's really going on from a pretty sober perspective. That newsletter is hard news, and it's focused on it, and I think it's fantastic. But they also, of course, have some of the best commentators, in my personal opinion, over there as well. It was an outlet founded by Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg, two guys I've known for a long time. They've been on the Reloads podcast. Kevin Williamson as well has been on our podcast. So you've heard from these guys if you've been a Reload listener for a while here. And, I think you should check out the Dispatch if you haven't already. We have a free trial as well, 30-day free trial for Reload listeners if you want to go over and check out their paid offering, which I think is well worth the money. So I'd encourage you to do that. There's a link in the description of this podcast or on our website if you want to check it out. So head over to the Reload or to get that link, or head over to the Dispatch to see what they're all about.